The committee will come to order. I was watching. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Lyons?
Here.
France? Here. Crawford? Daly? Here. Janeski? Lund? Here. McMillan? Here. Hooker? Here. Jacobson? Here. Price?
Here.
Yonker?
Here.
Lipton?
Here.
Kniezek? Here. Brinks?
Here.
Stallworth? Here. Amonte?
Here.
Abed?
Here.
Madam Chair, you have the floor.
Excellent. Is there a motion to excuse absent members? So moved. So moved. Well, yeah. Okay. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes from both meetings on March 13th? Okay. All right. We will go ahead and get started. We will call up folks to talk about House Bill 4276, sponsored by Tom McMillan. Go ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. I'd prefer if it's okay to stay here and ask questions as well to presenters potentially. But House Bill 4276 would effectively get us out of the Common Core and the national standards. We've got experts who will be testifying soon from Massachusetts, California, Maryland have flown in for this. One of the presenters was actually on one of the committees, the validation committee, and refused to sign it. So there are strong concerns about Common Core, and we also have a lot of people from around the state that have come here in support of the bill. And so I don't want to take up much time. We've got people that, I think we all would want to hear from that will be coming up. So with that, I'd like to ask you to turn it over to the first two, if you would.
Excellent. We have Melanie Curtis and Karen Braun.
Thank you.
Morning.
Thank you very much. I'm Melanie Curtis. I am a volunteer education advocate. I've been a math tutor for 15 years, active in the schools. I'm a past school board member for Portage Schools. Before that, I was on their curriculum committee, all those committees like that. And then last fall, I ran for the State Board of Education. So some of you have met me before, and I do come to many of your meetings and the State Board meetings. I want to thank Representative McMillan for submitting the bill, and for Chair Lyons for giving us the opportunity to come together for an open and honest debate about one of the most foundational issues for a state, the education of our children. You committee members, we realize, have many important issues in front of you, like EAA, the Michigan Merit Curriculum, the process we use for teacher evaluations. And I have been watching you, every one of you, and I'm impressed with how you continue to demonstrate a commitment and passionate concern for meeting the needs of the many needs, the varied needs of the children in our state. We know nationally and in our own state that across party lines, people are joining forces to stop Common Core. Recently, Michelle Malkin and Diane Ravitch are both nationally known people who are writing on this issue. More and more people are coming to the conclusion that this is not the way to really improve student outcomes. And conducting this open discussion will give us an opportunity to address our concerns. Our testimony in support of 4276 begins with a Michigan teacher and a Michigan parent, although our Michigan teacher is caught up in the lobby downstairs, I hope, and she might have to come after our experts. But national and international research shows that engaged parents and excellent teachers are the two most consistently successful factors that improve student outcomes. So we begin there. And then we have our national experts, as Representative McMillan mentioned, to come and share their personal experiences and knowledge with us to consider within the unique requirements of the state of Michigan. With that, let me introduce Karen. Karen Braun is a lifelong Michigan resident and mother of 6 wonderful children. Karen currently resides with her husband Steve and their 4 daughters in Canton. Her sons serve in the U.S. Marine Corps and are currently stationed in North Carolina. Karen is also a freelance writer and conference speaker on issues related to education, parenting, and family life. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from the University of Michigan.
Thank you, and thank you for your time. Please excuse my nerves. I'm a mom. I don't do this very often. Some say that the quality of education began to decline when we took prayer out of the schools. But I submit that educational quality declines when we take the payer out of the schools. That is, the quality declines in proportion to the distance the payer is from the student in the school. Common Core state standards are the completion of a long journey to move school funding and control from the parent local level to the federal level, creating a framework for a seamless P-20 national education system. When Michigan was just a territory, parents had complete authority over teachers and schools. Parents were the payer, and schools were accountable to them. As Michigan moved toward statehood, schools consolidated into districts, and local boards were created. Property taxes were collected to meet expenses. Education was local. So much so that the superintendent of public instruction in 1877 said, "There is, in Michigan, a feeling prevailing to a greater degree than in most other states that abhors centralization and resents outside interference." In the early 1990s, property tax reform and Proposal A created a more equitable funding mechanism by raising the sales tax. Property owners breathed a sigh of relief, but parents and teachers unwittingly lost much of their authority in local education to the state. Parents and teachers are now in the awkward position of sitting in committee hearings in Lansing discussing education. Why? Because Lansing holds the purse, so Lansing holds the power. Not parents, not teachers, not local school boards, but we're told the schools are still falling behind. What's next? In 2009, Secretary of Education Duncan said, "We have to start by recognizing that our system of education is not aligned. Every state has a different high school standard. If we accomplish one thing in the coming years, it should be to eliminate the extreme variation in standards across America." I know that talking about standards can make people nervous, but the notion that we have 50 different goalposts is absolutely ridiculous. Since Duncan's speech, 46 states have agreed on, quote, state-led Common Core state standards. I'm impressed. I have 6 children, and it's a major feat just to get them all to agree on what to put on a pizza. And yet, miraculously, in just a few years, 46 states have agreed to the same standards in education. That's the power of the purse. President Obama's Race for the Top program provided funding for states in exchange for adopting common standards in much the same way that the state of Michigan provided funds to local school districts in exchange for state standards. Just like the parent and the local school board, the state is unwittingly losing its voice and authority to the federal government. This very education committee will lose its voice and authority to make decisions because Secretary Duncan believes it is, quote, ridiculous to have 50 different goalposts. If 50 goalposts are ridiculous, so are 50 education committees and 50 state school boards. Soon we'll all be carpooling to D.C. to discuss education in Michigan. Remember, the quality of education declines in proportion to the distance the payer is from the student in the school. Losing federal money is a concern, but I submit that losing control over Michigan education is a greater concern. Michigan residents, not special interests or Washington, D.C., should determine education standards. And once Michigan opts in, there is no opting out of Common Core. We'll never go back to 50 separate goalposts. Every state will be playing on the federal field where Washington decides the goals and the standards. Everyone desires well-educated children. As a mom of 6 children, trust me, I understand the challenges such a goal presents. As a parent, I am fortunate to home educate my 6 children, and they're all different. And because we were the payer in our children's education, we were able to tailor the curricula to fit their interests and learning styles. 4 are now graduated, 1 a graduate of the University of Michigan Dearborn, and 2 in the Marine Corps, and I still have 2 to go. I understand that not everyone will choose to home educate, and some choose to enroll in Michigan public schools. But parents and teachers are the best decision makers for children in Michigan. Common Core standards are designed to fulfill the demands of politicians in Washington, not the dreams of children in Michigan. I support HB 4276. Michigan must abandon Common Core and embrace the opportunity to keep education a state and a local issue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, Karen. And fortunately, now we have our teacher, Lisa Keller. Lisa is a lifelong resident of Michigan, currently residing in Port Huron, where she was born and raised. She's a parent of 3 elementary school boys and also a Michigan public school teacher with 18 years of classroom experience in middle school, high school, and collegiate level. She earned her bachelor's degree in English from Michigan State University and a master's degree in literature from Northern Michigan University. Lisa is currently a member of her district's ELA curriculum committee that is charged with the task of redesigning their high school English curriculum to align with Common Core. Lisa.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I am here today to ask for your support of House Bill 4276 to repeal Common Core in Michigan. I have multiple concerns about the implementation of Common Core. First, the math and ELA standards were adopted sight unseen, with no input from the parents and teachers who live and work with our children every day. The State Department of Education unilaterally made that decision for me and every other parent, student, and teacher in this state. There is also no evidence to suggest that the Common Core standards will raise student achievement. There were no field studies conducted to measure the effectiveness of the standards. Common Core is merely a massive experiment. The problem is we are experimenting on the children of Michigan. Another concern I have is that the standards are expected to change over time. As a member of my district's curriculum committee, I received a copy of the Common Core standards and its related documents. In the introduction to the standards, it is stated that, quote, "The standards are intended to be a living work. Standards will be revised accordingly," unquote. However, local districts in the state of Michigan will have no authority to reject any revisions or to revise the standards if problems are encountered. Who knows what Common Core will look like in the future? The teachers with whom I am working generally like the high school ELA standards for Common Core, but this is merely for superficial reasons. First, the Common Core ELA standards are better organized than the standards for the Michigan Merit Curriculum. The standards are differentiated between expectations for 9th and 10th grade and expectations for 11th and 12th grade. There are also fewer standards for high school ELA, 41 compared to Michigan's 91. So they appear to be more manageable. However, these are not compelling reasons for reinventing an entire K-12 curriculum. There are educated people right here in Michigan with the expertise to organize and consolidate Michigan standards to better meet the needs of our students. A few years ago, the state of Michigan adopted new curriculum and standards, and as a result, teachers in districts across the state spent numerous hours in curriculum meetings realigning curriculums to meet the new standards. Then, the state of Michigan adopted the Common Core standards. And as a result, teachers in districts across the state are spending numerous hours of valuable classroom time, again, and spending energy outside of our classrooms, again, busily reinventing the wheel of curriculum, again, rather than focusing on teaching the students sitting in our classrooms. Arbitrarily changing the standards every few years only adds that much more burden to teachers working in an increasingly hostile environment. There is no guarantee that Common Core is going to raise student achievement. It is just another superficial Band-Aid that fails to address the systemic problems in our public schools. Please feel free to contact me if you have other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to open it up for questions. Representative Abed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Karen and Lisa, I really want to thank you for being here and for your input. I think that's invaluable. Looking at what you said, and I listened intently to both of your comments, and two things really jumped out at me. One was that parent involvement, that it's crucial that continue to be, and you're feeling that is being taken away gradually, that the parent is being separated from the direct contact with the school. That seemed to be one huge point. The other one being schools being accountable and local control. So those are the three things that came out, and also that no field study was done on this, that this is a massive experiment. I agree with your concerns laid out in that manner as far as that we need to address those and look at those. I also wonder how you feel, because that is exactly what's happening with our EAA schools in Detroit. And we're wanting to expand that, and we are taking away local control. We're taking away parental input. And we're also doing an experiment that has had no field study, only 5 months. So my question to you is, would you have the exact same concerns about our EAA schools? Because one of my huge concerns is it's really taking away local control and its experiment on our children. So, but if both of you wouldn't mind commenting on that, I would really like to hear your input. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you don't have to answer regarding EAA.
Okay.
Just if you want to if you can respond with Common Core, fine, as it relates, but.
I'd just like to quickly comment. I think it would make it eventually irrelevant anyway, because Common Core is a federal standard. It's a federal program. So what's done at the local level will eventually become inconsequential. So possibly for the short term, I mean, I'm against it because I like local control. But for the long term, it's a moot point because Common Core is going to become the federal standard. One goalpost. Detroit can't be, 49-1. It's one.
Okay, Representative Yonker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we were to, well, first I have two questions. First is, if we were to eliminate the Common Core, then what would we go to? All right, but another question on that in that same area is, when we went to the Common Core at that time, we had an issue with the federal government that was pushing a curriculum down in the schools. And the only defense we had to stop that from happening was the consortium of states. There was like 3 or 4 states. Michigan was one. That then we would be able to stand together to push back on anything coming in that we didn't want to accept as a state. So you say it's a federal program, but really it's not. It's a state program, consortium of governors of all the states. It's not a federal program. So if we eliminate that, then how do we control the federal government? Your thoughts on that? And then, of course, if we don't do Common Core, then what are you recommending for standard?
I can address that. With the consortium in states, in particular, we are signed on to participate in the Smarter Balanced assessments. And quite honestly, it's the tests that are going to drive the curriculum. Those tests are federally funded. It is a federal program. Once those tests are made public, that's what's going to determine our curriculum. So what would we do? The Michigan Merit Curriculum is in place, I think, with some revisions. I know the ELA best, obviously. We would do just fine with that. Currently, we haven't even given the Michigan Merit Curriculum time to be implemented for it to even work. This year's 9th graders, they're the first group of students who are required to take foreign language to graduate. We haven't even gone through the whole process with Michigan Merit yet, and I think we need to do that.
Representative Janetsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all 3 ladies for A, for caring about education in Michigan, and B, for having a very hands-on approach in several different ways. And thank you for serving on the ELA committee in your school district. Having done that, I hope you're enjoying it more than I did when I was there, and we were revamping curriculum. A couple of questions relative to that, and I'm not sure who wants to answer those. One of the statements made was relative to the Common Core, noting that it was only 41 standards versus the current 91 standards, and I believe the premise was that the 91 standards was better than 41, insinuating that the feds might not come on and tack on a bunch of new ones to the 41, and B, when we talk about the 91 standards, a lot of the current complaints with the Michigan Merit Curriculum from teachers in the field are that there are too many standards to get through in the current year, and hence we are graduating kids on to the next level who know things a mile wide but only an inch deep. Maybe they know their multiplication tables, but they're not as quick with them or can't go as deep. Can you reflect on some of those thoughts?
Again, the Common Core for ELA, which is what I'm familiar with, has the 41 standards, and the Michigan has the 91. It is overwhelming trying to cover all 91 every single year, all 4 years of a student's career. What Common Core does, which we could learn from here in Michigan, is they differentiate. This is for 9th and 10th grade. This is what 11th and 12th grade need to do. And I think we could do that with Michigan standards so that they are not as overwhelming, that we have to cover every single detail, all 91, every single year.
May I just interrupt, Ms. Chair? We have the subject matter experts, people that we brought in from out of state, and I'd really like to give them a chance to address you. These were people who were in the committees and in the process. So if it's possible that we could defer more questions to get those experts up here.
Yeah, let's hold questions related to Common Core for the experts, but I'm going to ask you to hold it because we have 2 more people that want to ask a question, and perhaps it's
just for
relevant for your Rep. Lamonti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to come here and speak to us about education in our state. As a homeschool parent, does the Common Core even affect you?
The answer is yes, because anything the federal government does in terms of education is going to affect everybody who is involved in education. And the core standards are part of a credentialing system that will eventually be in place where universities and employers are going to look for the credentials that are required. Right now on the FAFSA form, for example, I'll just speak personally on this one. If everybody knows what FAFSA is, they have kids that went to college. The FAFSA form has a question on there. The question is, do you have a, quote, valid diploma? The other option is homeschooled. Well, by checking homeschooled, what have you just admitted? That your homeschool diploma is not valid. And who defines valid? Well, the federal government will. Or the state, if we choose not to adopt Common Core. So that definitely has an effect. Should a student choose to approach the federal government, I don't recommend it. But that would be one personal example. But yes, it will definitely affect us.
But technically, you don't even have to follow the Glicks and the Huskies, what we used to have. I mean, you can teach to the curriculum that you design for.
True enough, but it still affects us because, again, if 50 goalposts, I'm going back to Arne Duncan's, Secretary Duncan's statement, if 50 goalposts in education are wrong, 50 goalposts in homeschool education will also be wrong. So Michigan will lose its autonomy to define what homeschooling means in the state of Michigan, not just for homeschoolers, because in Massachusetts or Pennsylvania, for example, have more onerous homeschool laws. Well, the federal government will want to seek that leveling as well, because 50 goalposts is wrong.
And just a couple of things. First of all, I totally hear your frustration. I was a high school science teacher, literally just in the classroom just a few months ago, and I understand your frustration with implementing a process, a policy, a set of standards, and then constantly switching when we haven't even had a chance to try something out yet. But I also I know that in my district we had been already putting a lot of money and professional development time into implementing the Common Core already. How much time has your district spent on actually implementing Common Core to this point?
For our ELA, we just started this fall. We started meeting in October. Our middle school teams met last year, and other than that, I don't have a lot of knowledge as to how much time they have put into it. I know middle school is not finished with the implementation process, and we're really just getting started at high school.
So, again, I'm looking at the idea that a lot of schools have already put a lot of time and professional development and funding into implementing the Common Core, and once again, we are going to change the goalpost once again. So if we get rid of these. Thank you.
One more, Representative Kniezek.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our presenters, especially you, Karen. Certainly appreciate your boys' service. So, we've heard a lot about the role of the federal government in Common Core, and so I was under the impression that it was really the National Governors Association and some other groups that were driving this, as well as the Gates Foundation and the Mott Foundation who provided the funding. Could you speak to what you mean as to the federal involvement?
If I might, I guess I would defer that question to our experts. because they have a better perspective on that from that level.
And would the experts also be able to talk to the role of the business community in the development?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for taking your time to come up here.
All right, let me quick introduce who we have. We have Emmett Gordy. He's the executive director with the American Principles Project. He graduated from Georgetown University with a BA in philosophy, a minor in theology, and then he earned his JD from Fordham University School of Law in New York. He's a native of Washington, D.C., and currently resides in the Beltway with his family. Then we have Sandra Stotsky. She's Professor Emerita of Education Reform, the University of Arkansas, a Senior Associate Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Education from 1999 to 2003, and among other duties was in charge of development and revision of the state's K-12 standards in all major subject areas, licensing regulations for teachers and administrators, teacher licensure tests, and professional development criteria. She reviewed all states' English language arts standards for the Thomas B. Fordham Institute in 1997, 2000, and 2005. She co-authored Achieve Inc.'s American Diploma Project High School Exit Test as standards for English in 2004. And most importantly, she served on the Common Core Validation Committee from 2009 to 2010 as the ELA expert. And then we have Zev Werman. He's a visiting scholar at the Hoover Institute from 2007 and 2009. He served as a senior advisor in the Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Department at the U.S. Department of Education. Throughout the development of Common Core in 2009 and 10, he analyzed the mathematics drafts for the Pioneer Institute and for the state of California. In the summer of 2010, he served on the California Academic Context Standards Commission that reviewed the adoption of Common Core for California. In the late 90s, he participated in the development of California Math Content Standards and Framework and served on the Mathematics Content Review Panel for the California State Test since its inception in 1999. He's currently an executive with the Silicon Valley Semiconductor startup.
Thank you all for being here. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions from the representatives up here, so if you can make sure to keep your comments balanced between brief yet informative, that'd be much appreciated.
All right. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I guess I'm starting off on the wrong foot since I'm a lawyer from Washington, D.C. Just to address a couple of the questions. So the idea of national standards has been around for a while, and then in around 2006, 2007, 2008, it was taken up by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. If we go back to Mrs. Braun's testimony, who's the payor? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation recruited 2 private trade associations to the effort, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. They have official sounding names, but they are private trade associations. Their meetings they're not subject to sunshine laws, open records, FOIA requests, things of that nature. Those 2 entities own the Common Core. They've put a copyright on the Common Core. They've even put a limitation of liability notice on the Common Core. It reads like the back of a cigarette carton. So since about 2006, 2007, Joy Pullman of School Reform News estimates or calculates that the Gates Foundation alone, and there's other foundations involved, the Gates Foundation alone has put over $160 million into the Common Core effort, much of it for propagating the idea of the standards, some of it for development of the standards, but much of it for basically PR and advocacy. A lot of that money, to answer your question, a lot of that money has gone to the business community, an affiliate of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, some business roundtables, the idea of raising a cry in favor of the standards. So what happened? They had this strategy. It's basically a strategy to bring national standards to the country. They developed a plan. It's in their document called Benchmarking for Success. Came out in December 2008. In the transition for the new administration, they convinced the administration to go with this plan. It was put in. They got $4.35 billion from Congress in the 2009 stimulus bill, with a lot of discretionary authority tied to that. They used that to implement Race to the Top, which brought us the Common Core standards and the assessments tied to the Common Core standards. So that's where it came from. At this point in 2009, the standards hadn't been developed yet. They hadn't started developing the standards. As soon as the stimulus bill was passed, Arne Duncan said on C-SPAN that he really liked the work that our outside partners, Achieve and the Gates Foundation, he said, are doing to bring about national standards, and he said he wanted to be the catalyst to make that happen. So at that time, they knew what they wanted in terms of the attributes of a product. They wanted fewer, clearer, deeper, rigorous, college-ready, state-led, internationally benchmarked standards. For the most part, those promises, which are made, again, before the standards were developed, turned out not to be fulfilled. But the states were on a very, very tight time frame, as was the National Governors Association, to develop the standards. The states were on a short time frame in which to accept the standards. So in short, here's what happened. In March, the first round of Race to the Top, the applications were due January 2010. And in that, the states had to commit to the standards. The first draft of the standards came out in March 2010. Second round, Race to the Top applications were due by June 1, 2010. The final draft of the standards came out the next day, June 2nd, 2010. And in the applications, the states had to commit to the standards. It's important to note, I think, that when we were talking about what the department wanted was they wanted a demonstration of commitment to the standards. So it wasn't an if-then proposition, really. It wasn't, well, if we get Race to the Top money, we promise to implement the standards. It was, here's our application. If you read our application, you'll see that we're really committed to implementing these standards regardless. That's how you got 45 states committing to the standards and assessments. So Michigan submitted its application June 2nd, 2010. June 1st. June 15th, the State Board of Education voted to accept the standards. That was their last scheduled meeting before the August 2nd deadline. States that were applying on round 2 had until August 2nd to formally adopt the Common Core. So you submit your application showing that you're committed to the standards, then you had 2 more months in which to actually adopt them, which is necessary given that the standards, the final draft of the standards didn't come out to the next day. So that's the framework in which these came down. The states were under intense pressure to get as much stimulus money as possible for fiscal reasons. I don't want to take up too much time, but going forward, those same forces, Gates Foundation, federal government, a consortia of 40-some states, Michigan is facing all of those forces in terms of controlling its standards. You have to adopt the standards 100%. You can add 15%, but you can't change any of it. With that, I want to turn it over to the content experts, Sandra Stotsky and Zev Warman.
Thank you. Let me also add that while I was at the Massachusetts Department of Education, I was not only in charge of all of our K-12 standards, but I want to point out that the goal for the ELA standards, which I was very personally involved in because that is my research background, reading and literature, our goal was to lift all children, and that was what we accomplished with our standards. We were looking to raise the floor for all groups, and that was one of the greatest achievements of the Massachusetts standards. We raised all demographic groups higher, so that is why Massachusetts became #1 on NAEP, grade 4, grade 8, in English and in math, as well as internationally. And it was not just the standards. I want to say that a good part of what I was doing was making sure the standards were embedded in teacher preparation and in professional development. And part of what I was doing was changing licensure tests. And I would urge Michigan to consider that if you ever want to have first-class standards taught to your children, one of the first things you need to do is to raise the admission bar for your preparation programs. Nothing's going to change in this country until we get a higher academic level of teacher in your schools. So that has to be a piece of a master plan that's worked out. Let me go to the points I'm going to make very briefly, because it's based on my work on the validation committee for Common Core for the 1 year that I was on the committee, and I was one of the 5 people on that committee who did not sign off at the end because they were not internationally benchmarked, they were not research-based, and they were not going to make us competitive, and they were of mediocre quality. Let me give you my philosophical perspective. I am not a libertarian. I do believe in state standards, and I would accept national standards, but they have to be first class. Otherwise, if they're not first class, I'm not interested in them, and I don't want them for any state or for this country in particular. So I will speak to briefly why Common Core's non-rigorous English standards will reduce college readiness and the ability to do critical thinking, contrary to the claims that are often made. I will explain why they lack a research base and qualified authors, how the English class can prepare students for authentic college coursework, where Michigan could get ideas from for a first-class core academic curriculum, which I think is a very good idea, and then what Michigan can do to increase student learning in all subjects beyond what I've just pointed out. You have to understand why. I'm going to skip a lot of material because it's in the written testimony I've given you or you have distributed. But the nature of Common Core's English language arts standards, they are not content standards. They are skills. They are empty skills. That's why they have no rigor. You can apply the same skill to the 3 Little Pigs as you apply to Moby Dick. The skill might be find the main idea. You can find the main idea in the 3 Little Pigs, and you can find the main idea in Moby Dick. The difference is the content you're working on. Anyone who plays an instrument knows that the repertoire makes all the difference in the world. What you practice matters. What you give students in a class matters. And Common Core's college readiness standards have had the unfortunate effect, because of its 50-50 mandate, which I suspect you've heard about, 50% of the readings have to be informational, the other 50 can be literary, but that is not what English teachers are trained to teach, and that is not what they have been teaching in Michigan. Most English teachers want to teach literature, and complex literature is how you develop critical thinking skills. I can't give you an example with even a simple Wordsworth poem, which I'd love to do, but the point is you learn how to read between the lines with complex literature, not with propaganda material on computer nerds or fast foods or teenage marketing. That isn't the kind of material you learn to read between the lines in. Now, why didn't we get the kind of people writing the standards we should have gotten? Because they were chosen by the Gates Foundation. And the 2 people they chose, one for English and one for math, neither of them had ever taught in K-12, and neither of them has ever published anything on curriculum instruction. They knew very little about K-12, and they were not content experts for K-12. So the choice of who wrote the standards was limited. Now, the states may say, because the propaganda line has been that they led the development of the standards. They didn't. I was on the validation committee, and we knew perfectly well who was writing the standards. Tell me when I have about a minute left. A minute left. Okay. I've already pointed out that Michigan can get ideas for a first-class academic curriculum from several sources. First of all, Core Knowledge Foundation spells out a coherent curriculum for K-8. The Junior Great Books Foundation has excellent discussion questions for both literary and non-literary texts. Any teacher who's ever taught from the Great Books Foundation material knows how wonderful their open-ended discussion questions are. I've also provided on my University of Arkansas homepage a complete English language arts framework based upon my compressed revision of the Massachusetts ones, which were considered the best in the country. Now, the final, Free. Oh, yes. I don't make any money from any of this. That's not my philosophy. In any event, you have to remember that high quality in a state's standards is not enough. You do need teachers who can teach to those standards, and that was what we aimed for in Massachusetts. We had to raise the bar, and I did it through the tests that we developed, the licensure tests for teachers, and they are known as among the best licensure tests in the country. So, to finish off quickly, I would say that you need to develop your own standards which you can control and be able to revise them every 5 to 7 years by identified Michigan teachers, such as the one we heard, and discipline-based experts in the arts and sciences, of which you have many here. I am an alumna of the University of Michigan. I know this state has loads of wonderful people in your academic disciplines. Those are the people in math, science, and engineering who should be on committees deciding what your mathematics science or science standards should be, not people who are not content experts. Your problem right now is that you've been dumped with the costs, and that's about it. You are going to pay for the technology costs, and you will have to pick up the bill, and you will have no choice in the matter unless you leave while the leaving is still possible. It's like leaving on a moving train. It still can be done because the train is only barely taking off. But now is the time, if you're going to leave at all, and do something about first-class standards, not non-competitive ones. Thank you. I'm sorry. You're over here.
That's okay. Madam Chair, committee members, I will speak to mathematics, and I will try to make briefly 3 major points. One is that the standards are not internationally benchmarked. They are 1 to 2 years behind, and they are mediocre and experimental. The second one is that the college readiness definition of the Common Core is below what today colleges expect their incoming freshmen. So rather than having less remediation, you will end up with more remediation. And the third one is the various benefits of Common Core and the cost that I will try to touch. Let me go quickly to the issue of supposed rigor and excellence of the standards. The mathematician that was on the validation committee summarized his rejection of signature, basically saying the standards are not at the level of those of high-achieving countries or top state mathematics standards, including California, Minnesota, Indiana, and Massachusetts. Moreover, this difference in level is significant, being approximately 1 to 2 years at the end of 8th grade. That was the validation committee expert on the subject of mathematics. Common Core claims they have lean and mean approach, lesser standard, much more focus, much more depth. However, in their focus and leanness, they took away a lot of material that other high-achieving countries actually do teach. They took away a lot of geometry. They took away things like prime decomposition of numbers, so they cannot teach common denominators. They took away a lot of stuff without any evidence to the effectiveness of this thing. They also took away aiming at what other countries do, which is algebra in grade 8. In this country, we tried to do it over the last decade. Common Core reflects backtracking on this promise, and now algebra is promised for high school. Maybe I should also mention on this level of rigor and skill, Virginia Tech mathematics professor investigated the major crown jewel of Common Core, which is the fraction, and his summary is very succinct and painful. I'm quoting, "The Common Core standard about fraction not only do not support skill development, they encourage practices that result in dysfunctional skills." These are standards that have not been experimented and tried out anywhere in many areas, and we are imposing them on the whole nation. The second issue has to do with the college readiness definition. Suddenly, all the kids that graduate high school, it's not only they graduate high school, they should be college ready. Well, you cannot put it too high because you cannot fail half of the high school kids. So they set it below Algebra 2, which today is the typical entry requirements in your own state colleges, for your state colleges. And the authors of the Common Core admit those are standards for non-selective community colleges, not for four-year state college. So you are going to end up with more remediation. Finally, let me touch a little bit on the cost. Yeah, I'm sure you know these numbers by now. Unfortunately, you didn't know them maybe 3 years ago. But you are spending today about $22 per student on assessment on the MEAP. And the Smarter Balance will end up to be about $50 per student because the $25 that you were told does not include scoring the performance items. And that's easily another $25 per student. And then you have to add at least about $50 per student every year, not one time, every year on the cost of technology. If you amortize the cost of the computer, the maintenance over so many years, divided by so many students that can use single computer, you come to $50 per student a year. That's $100. That's 4 times more than you've spent today. So I'll rest here and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Representative Abed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andrea, is your first name Andrea? What is it?
Sandra.
Sandra, I'm sorry. I didn't have I wasn't sure which of the different articles I have here were from you. I just wanted to ask a question of you, and thank you for your presentation. It's very thorough and very informative. One of the things that sounded like that you were saying that's critical for the success of our students is having very qualified teachers and making sure, and you said in Massachusetts you actually raised the bar, which would go hand in hand with expectations. I'm just wondering how you feel about Teach for America students being in our schools and teaching with certificates, because that's what's happening in our EAA schools. So I'm just wondering for Teach for
Representative
America.
Abed.
Yes.
Please keep your questions focused on the Bill of Common Core.
Okay, so how would you feel about Teach for America being instructors in the schools? Thank you.
Following the lead of your chair, it's not directly related to Common Core. What I would say is that most of the teachers, those who become teachers in your public schools come from your traditional schools of education. And that is where you need to raise the bar, both before and after. This is what happened in medicine 100 years ago. You had admission requirements that were high academically for getting into a medical school, and you had exit requirements in the form of a board for getting out of a medical school and practicing. We don't have good enough ones in education. The reason Teach for America works so well for what it does do is the fact that they have been students at very selective colleges who then stay in education for a couple of years. But that isn't part of what I want to deal with here. The issue is, how do you get more academically competent people into teaching, and then how do you make sure their licensure tests are academically demanding to begin with? That was the part I could handle. I couldn't change admission criteria. That isn't possible in the Department of Ed.
Representative Kniezek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know you guys essentially touched on it, but I just want to recap one last time, and that is that it is or it is not a federally driven program being driven by these private trade associations that you mentioned.
I think it's best described as a cartel. You have the federal government accepting a strategy that was developed by the Gates Foundation and to which they gave have paid tremendous amounts of money, and the federal government has accepted that. Arnie Duncan, for instance, his first chief of staff was a high official from the Gates Foundation, their deputy director of education for strategy. The Department of Education funds the two testing consortia, so the teacher evaluations are tied in large part to how students do on the assessments. The assessments are coordinated and paid for by the Federal Department of Education, so it operates hand in hand.
If I may just add one sentence. In the recent State of the Union, President Obama said, and I quote, 4 years ago, we started Race to the Top, a competition that convinced almost every state to develop smarter curricula and higher standard, all for about 1% of what we spend on education each year. So he is taking credit for it. Maybe you should direct the question to him.
I'll give him a call. Well, quick follow-up, Madam Chair. Just for informative purposes, I'm hearing a lot of what sounds like zero-sum mentality when it comes to Michigan Merit Curriculum or Common Core standards. Can you guys speak to the fact that they're truly not independent of one another? We're not going to lose Michigan Merit Curriculum and replace it with the Common Core. One is meant to enforce the others, or are you worried that one potentially could replace the other?
I served at the Department of Education in 2007 through 2009, and I'm not aware of any federal official trying to push curriculum standards on the states. You mentioned, I think, before that there was some push, and unless it's consortium, we will not stand against the federal push. There was a federal push to make sure that the tests are cut scores, their cut scores are demanding. And there was talk about some standards are better or worse, but there was never a push. Each state could define their own standard until then.
Each state had to have standards, right?
Representative Lamonti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things. When you talk about the math curriculum, and I'm actually certified for math and science, and one of the complaints that I had as a high school teacher with students that were coming in at the high school level was that with the GLICs that we used to have, we were getting, and I think it was mentioned here before, like a mile wide and an inch deep in some of the curriculum that was, being put on our elementary school students. And so when I got them at the high school level, when I would ask, and my advanced students, IB physics students, I'd ask them, what's 7 times 12? And instead of just ripping off 84, they'd pull out a calculator because they had not gotten those basics to a degree that they truly needed. And what I'm seeing with the Common Core is that it is giving that ability at the lower levels to truly get these kids the basic skills they need at the depth that they need, as opposed to what we had previously.
I wish what you say would be true, because I agree with you that the basic skills are suffering and have been suffering for a long time. Common Core actually claims that it provides fluency. However, if you read it carefully, not just the end point, you will see that the fluency is supposed to happen kind of magically by a particular grade, but 2-3 years prior, they pump the student full of various the invented algorithms and their own ideas how to do stuff. Only in the last moment, and typically delay vis-a-vis other countries, they say, oh, and by the way, they should be fluent in standard algorithm. So they're blessed that they eventually expect the standard algorithm, but they teach for so many years, so much fuzz, excuse me for the word, that it's hard to believe it will work. And that's why I say it's experimental. It's true they have the demand. Yeah, eventually they should do it. How they will do it, I find it hard to believe.
Also, when you were talking about the ELA standards and the idea that they're trying to put in and develop technical writing and reading skills, as a science teacher, I was actually being trained to implement the Common Core ELA piece within my science classroom. And I was developing ways that I was, as a science teacher, getting my students to write and read in technical manners, using having them write elaborate lab reports or research papers. And this, I think, was, even though an English teacher would still be doing the literary piece, we would see the technical piece being done in our science and math classrooms.
That's fine. That's where it should be taking place. But Common Core still has 10 informational reading standards and 9 literary standards, 50-50 approximately, from K to 12 for English teachers. You'd have to look at the document to see that the English reading teachers have to divide what they teach 50-50. Then there is to be informational reading instruction in the other subjects as well. So they're two separate things. There are literacy standards for social studies, science, and other technical subjects, and then there are the 50-50 standards for ELA by itself. The English teacher is not going to be able to teach just literature because it says 50-50 for theirs. And it all depends how the superintendent has interpreted it, but most people around the country are being told by superintendents that English teachers on the reading test will be held accountable for teaching informational reading. There's no way that they can divide up the accountability for the reading test or the ELA test so that other teachers it just hasn't been worked out. How do you divide up the accountability?
But isn't that idea that our kids need to have that skill of informational reading and especially
Absolutely.
as we're pushing towards more STEM in our country, that we need to have those to have them.
I agree, and especially in history classes, which have done far less reading and writing than they should have. But that's for those subjects. The ELA standards are basically about the English class. There's only a small piece, 9 pages out of the 65-page document that are about other subjects. There's some confusion in interpretation about how they're being interpreted, but about 9 pages out of 65 are for other subjects, literacy standards they're called, without the content, but all the rest is for the English teacher. And you would have to find out what English teachers are being told about this 50-50 division in order to prepare for the Common Core test.
Representative, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Representative Lipton.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for your testimony. I've been following educational reform efforts in Finland, Massachusetts, Connecticut, etc. And my question is, particularly with your experience in Massachusetts, could you comment, or any of you comment on the cost involved in educational transformation that's really educator and teacher driven? My impression is that is by far the better way as opposed to the standards and accountability measure. But isn't it is it more costly?
I will touch a little bit. Because of Finland, I think a lot of people believe, well, here is another way to do education reform. Finland indeed put very high bar for entry to the profession and very high bar to licensure, as Sandra mentioned here. So here is another way, and maybe it's not even costly, and it doesn't push the standard so hard. The answer is there are many ways to achieve educational excellence. If you look at what Singapore or Hong Kong did, it's completely, radically different from Finland. Yet both of them achieve very high on PISA. On TIMSS, which is content-based, actually Finland did not achieve as high. It's just mediocre, not bad, but it's not great. But in any case, it just shows that indeed there is no one way to teach math. There's no one way to teach literature. And the belief that somehow the gospel will come from Washington, this is the way and everybody will follow and it will save us all, I think it's naive. There are many ways.
Could I just add something, because I wasn't quite sure where your question was going, but one of the great achievements in the state with the standards that Massachusetts had was with the regional vocational technical high schools. That is something Finland and most European countries have specialized in. You may not know that Finland ends compulsory education in grade 9. children have a choice of high school to go to, and over 50% choose to go to their vocational technical high schools because they're not interested in doing a lot of reading and writing or going to an academic high school. That's their choice. They have a free choice. Most European countries operate that way. In this country, we don't want to give kids that choice. Where we have given it to them, and this was what happened in Massachusetts, we have waiting lists. These are schools that don't track kids, by the way, for the old-time carpentry workshop, which people worry about from 70 years ago. They don't exist anymore. We still produce carpenters, but there are boilermakers, electronic, and other kinds of tool and die makers that are just out of sight. But the point is, that's the system that would give the kind of motivation to young adolescents to stay in school with the same standards for the major subjects, because that was what Massachusetts insisted on. So they can go to college, and in fact, over half who do go to our regional vocational technical schools go on to college. They may not go to liberal arts, but they go on to some form of post-secondary education. That's been totally unexplored, and it's not part of Duncan's idea. He discourages it, which is too bad, because this is what is done in most other industrialized countries, and it works. That may not have been where you were going, but it really is an important point.
Well, it actually was, and I was hoping you could just speak about the significant or public investment. In other words, Massachusetts did all of that with very little, if at all, private investment.
Not the voc tech schools. Typically, in any state, they are developed in communities where there are local businesses or industries who then help to guide the particular occupational programs that are taught in those particular schools, because, after all, they are training kids for an occupation or a trade to get a job if they want after high school, and it usually will be somewhere in the region, not to go to another part of the country, so that local businesses and industries have an investment to make, which they do in European countries, in the particular vocational regional high school. There are hundreds of programs, and the ones that are offered will reflect the local market conditions. So if you need tool and die makers, that's going to be the program supported by your local business. So no, there is no federal money necessarily. There's just a piece called Perkins money that goes back about 40 years. But aside from that, the money comes from the state and from local industry, because to have that kind of equipment and very low teacher-student ratios because of safety conditions in these schools, I visited many of them, you have to spend more money per student for these kinds of schools. But they are wonderful schools in terms of student morale. I am impressed with them, and very few people know much about them in this country, unfortunately.
Representative Yonker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quick question for Sandra, and then a question for, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but give us a background. Is Massachusetts participating in the Corps? Or did they back out?
Oh, yes.
They are?
Yes. I'm sorry. Oh, yes. They were among the first states as a sacrificial lamb to adopt Common Core. The governor of the state is a close friend of the president, and it's very well known that there was $250 million in Race to the Top money that was promised to the state if it would agree to dump its first-class standards, which everyone realized, and adopt Common Core. And there was a long courtship between the Commissioner of Ed and Washington. This all happened, and Massachusetts was one of the first to fold up and got rid of its own great standards, with several reports, all financed by the Gates Foundation, that said the differences were too close to call, or it's half a dozen of one, 6 of the other, but basically the standards are of equal quality, which was, of course, not true. But this is a whole other political problem that I can't go into detail here. You have a question for Emmett.
Yeah, and it kind of takes off from what your last comment is. I was on the school board in my community when this thing started to come to the forefront. And how they started this is they came to all the school boards and they had to sign a resolution to support the Common Core. And that resolution from the school boards then moved to the department to say we are supporting this. But what we were told is that this was a way to stop the federal government from intruding into state. All right, so I don't know if you can give us some light on that, but that's part of the process I was involved in when this thing started to move.
I think for the most part, for the Common Core, what they say is the case is oftentimes not the case. The Common Core is often described as no child left behind on steroids. So, and I would go back to that process was kind of front loaded. I mean, ideally, what you would do is you would get the product, both the standards and the assessments, and then you'd be able to sit down and have a reasonable amount of time to study them. And because the Common Core was advertised as being transformative, I think you would want to, do a little bit more than study them. Probably want to have discussed it with the legislature and perhaps the citizens and parents, and all of those options, and pilot them and look at the studies underlying them. All those options were foreclosed because of the tremendous drive to get this all done and to get stimulus money out and to get the states signed up before any of the. A lot of this was in reaction. The last time there was a serious effort for national standards was about 18 years ago with national history standards. And when that finally came to the light of day, the Senate passed a resolution 99-1 against the history standards, and so that effort died off. And I think the propagators of the Common Core learned from that experience, and that was, if you can't have national standards if you involve the people and their elected representatives in a serious, meaningful discussion. I do want to say quickly in Massachusetts, I believe it was March 2009, the president, before the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, again, this is before the Common Core was developed, before the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, he said every state ought to have standards like Massachusetts. And of course, that was what I was saying, that was the promise of the Common Core. But what we got, and I think was far from it. And I think the reason was because the people and their elected representatives were cut out of the process.
Representative Janetsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the entire opportunity. It's been very intellectually stimulating, and I appreciate the experts coming in. I'm of the belief, and I may be mistaken, that I only have copies of one of the testimonies. Is it possible we can get copies of everyone's testimony?
Mine's on the way.
Okay, I'd appreciate that greatly. Have there been any direct studies that you're aware of between the current Michigan standards and the Common Core standards? You've cited California and Massachusetts as far as people having compared the two and being quite a bit different for the previous Cadillac standards in other states.
The Fordham Institute does regular review of state standards.
Okay.
It rated the mathematics the same way it rated the Common Core. It rated ELA lower. However, there are issues with the ELA that Dr. Stolsky mentioned that didn't come up actually in this particular review.
Representative Hooker.
Thank you, and I appreciate your testimonies. Sandra, you mentioned how Europe and many of the other areas do after ninth grade or the equivalent of ninth grade. Students start being directed toward their final outcome, either toward a university or toward a voc tech area.
They're actually, it's a choice. It's a clear choice.
Yeah, I don't mean they're given an opportunity to direct themselves. By doing what we're doing in the Race to the Top and now the Common Core, aren't we making everyone be directed towards a college university type direction? And in fact, as we mentioned, the No Child Left Behind on steroids, we're leaving a big number of voc tech type students completely behind in the schools because they're more frustrated, because they're not getting that opportunity to get the standards that they need for their selected direction. They're taking standards that are set to prepare them for a university entrance.
They should be taking the same level of coursework in English, history, and something equivalent in math and science as part of their high school training. But you're right, it's affecting voc tech schools, but we still don't know exactly how yet. I've been following the situation only in Massachusetts because I've visited many of them and know what they're like. We don't know yet because Common Core really hasn't been totally implemented and the tests haven't been put in place with a cut score. So that's why it's hard to say what it will do. But it does seem to have the effect of reducing the time that the students in these schools would have with what is called SHOP, their SHOP courses, the occupational training programs, the other programs they have, which can be very demanding in their own right. Because robotics, I've looked at the list of different types of certificates that are now available that students can earn, and they are extremely demanding and require integration of math and science into them. But it's too early for us to know how they're going to be affected. All we know is that the USED, the current one, doesn't like the idea of spreading them, which is too bad. It discourages them. It wants kids to go through K-12 and then go on for technical training, which is about 4 years later than their peers in other countries would be. And this is part of the problem. Money is a different issue. Apprenticeships, for example, are very common in Europe, Denmark, Germany, and Finland. Kids can earn money from the age of 14 or 15 on if they work for a large business or industry, depending upon the quality of the work they do. Young adolescents, many of them who aren't interested in reading and writing, and there are a lot of them, like this because they can earn money as they go along. The teachers are absolutely master teachers. That's what they have to guarantee. These countries make sure that the teachers of these students in the voc tech schools or in industry are first class. But you do get kids taking these other programs of study and still meeting the major subjects so that if they do want to switch, they're not tracked. This has been a part of the European problem for generations. And why we've had an open system, we don't need to move towards the wrong way and make kids all go through 12 years to go on to college when a good number of them aren't interested. They could do other wonderful things with their hands. And I happen to come from a family where people worked with their hands, so I value people who work with their hands. I don't see anything wrong with people who do these jobs. So you have to think through the whole picture.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap this up, and we've got one more question, and then we'll move on. Representative McMillan.
Thanks, and thanks for the panel coming from all around the country. I wanted to wrap it up by saying I've talked to groups that have superintendents, talked to 50, 100 superintendents, and I hear that, we've spent a lot of money already. And that's one reason why we can't back out. Well, that really goes to a point that if we're going to spend 5 or 6 times more in implementing it, it's going to be that much more harder to say that we're going to get out. We've spent, if it's already the money that we've spent, I think that goes to my point that now is the time to do it, to cut your losses and move on. And the second thing is changing the standards. If, we've talked about in this committee about the focus schools, that we do not like the idea that they're tagging our schools because we've got a gap. We've got kids that are too smart, so they tag our schools, and now we've got to do all kinds of other things. We've got to lower that gap. The kids that are smart are too smart. And the comment is we can't do anything about it. We can't pass a bill. We've got to go lobby Washington to change our waiver, to change something. This is just on steroids. This is, if we don't like a standard, we're going to say, well, we've got to send a group. Hopefully we can get a group of states that are agreeing with us on this standard, but we got to go lobby some other outside. It's not going to, this group is going to be sitting here saying time and time, yeah, we don't like the standard, but what are we going to do? We spent so much money, and we doubt we can convince this consortium or the federal government to change the waivers. It just is farther removing any ability for Michigan to have an impact on our students, it seems.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. I want to thank you for coming into town today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up Eileen Weiser, State Board of Education member. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Eileen Weiser from the State Board of Education. And in the interest of the national discussion that was just underway, I should also say that I served as a Bush appointee to the National Assessment Governing Board. I caught my son's cold. I'm really sorry. The National Assessment Governing Board, which does the nation's report card for 8 years. The Common Core standards are state-led and state-developed standards. They're not a state curriculum, which
Eileen,
is... Yes.
Can I have you introduce the folks that are sitting at your side here?
I'll do 2 out of 3 because I'm not sure I know your name. Linda Forward from the Department of Education, Bill Schmidt, who is a distinguished professor of...
Statistics and Education.
Statistics and Education from MSU, and...
Wendy Sedep-Roper. Wendy Sedep-Roper from the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals.
Of course. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. The Common Core state standard effort surveyed employers and college university standards to develop the college and career-ready skills and knowledge that's in the Common Core, and they studied academic standards in high-achieving countries. 85% of the standards were developed for all the states who adopted them, but the remaining 15% is written by each state. Because Michigan is a local control state, districts will develop and have been developing their own curricula. How do the Common Core standards differ from Michigan's former grade level content standards? They are more clear. They're consistent expectations in reading, writing, speaking, listening, language, and math. They're realistic and relevant to the real world. They're practical expectations that reflect the knowledge and skills students need to enter the workforce or for credit-bearing courses for 2- and 4-year college programs. Unlike many other states, Michigan's standards closely match the Common Core, but part of their appeal is that they provide specific goals and benchmarks to ensure students achieve certain skills and knowledge, specific skills and knowledge at the end of each year. This differs from our previous grade-level content expectations, which required exposure in certain grades but not mastery. And how this plays out, as an example, is that with the Common Core, when a child hasn't mastered their 0 to 10 multiplication and division facts by the end of 3rd grade, because of developmental delays or a mismatch with the curriculum that they're learning or classroom instruction, our good Michigan teachers will realize that that student needs help. They'll be better prepared to analyze and address the problem before the student falls far behind, which does happen far too often now. The standards will also guide better teacher preparation, so our new teachers will have stronger skills entering the classrooms. The standards build, just as in Michigan, where we did relatively closely match the state standards when we did the crosswalk. The standards are built on prior state standards work, and they would allow collaboration between states if we desire to develop textbooks, digital media, and other teaching materials for economy of scale. They also allow creation of common comprehensive assessments, one of which we belong to, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Corporation Consortium was referenced earlier. And because Michigan has provided substantial leadership for that, we're in a good position to be able to move quickly to it. We can't lose sight of the student achievement scores that show that Michigan does need better K-12 education. Michigan's 2011 NAEP math and reading scores and improvement levels overall and by subgroup were in the bottom third of states for both 4th and 8th grade. Despite the fact that we are at the 9th highest level of combined funding, total funding, from federal, state, and local millage support, or you could say we're 23rd in state support, but those two statistics are significant. Our students scored 36th in the country in the 8th grade NAEP math assessment and 35th in 4th grade reading. Michigan also has the second largest fourth grade NAEP reading achievement gap in the country between white and black students, nearly 34 points difference. And we have the fifth largest gap between white and black students, 36 points, on the eighth grade NAEP assessment for math. The State Board of Education is constitutionally charged with making policy for K-12 education. We recognize that we're asking schools and teachers to make challenging improvements in their practice. After analyzing the educational quality and services of the Common Core, we adopted it because we believe they are necessary to prepare our students for adulthood and lifelong learning. I do recognize and understand the grave political concerns being voiced that a state-led standards movement could be co-opted by the federal government and become a forced federal curriculum. The Obama administration did this important state-led undertaking no favors when it allowed states to receive points for the standards adoption in its flawed review process for race-to-the-top applicants. The U.S. spends approximately $600 billion yearly on K-12 education. Of the $2.4 trillion in all K-12 spending over the Race to the Top's four-year payout, $4.35 billion was granted to 12 awardees. Applicants could score 485 points in the competition. Of those, 40 were possible, only 40 for adoption of the Common Core. Points were also awarded based on progress with performance-based standards for annual teacher and principal review, which Michigan is undergoing right now, promoting charter schools and privatization of education. We are a leader in charter schools in the country. Computerization, prioritization of STEM education, and complying with other nationwide standards. The connection to past discretionary federal funding is certainly there, but given the scale and limit of Race to the Top, there has not been ongoing coercion for states to keep the standards for any reason beyond educational merit. I understand the very significant worry that rules could change and that this could be the camel nose under the tent, but there are other remedies, including the judicial system, to address a potential loss of states' rights. If the federal government wanted to control a national curriculum, basing it directly on the NAEP, the Nation's Report Card, of which I was a board member of the governing board, would have been easier, or would be easier. The NAEP's been in existence since 1988, except for 4th and 8th grade reading and math every 2 years, which is required for No Child Left Behind. The assessment is completely voluntary, and individual students and schools can decline participation. Subject matter frameworks exist for nearly every subject taught in K-12. It's important to note here that in 2006, when we were developing the Michigan Merit Curriculum, there was, at one point, more videography instruction required in the curriculum than there was informational text. The 12th grade NAEP assessment is 75% informational text. Unlike our previous testimony, the NAEP believes that critical thinking skills can be taught through historical documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Magna Carta. The ability to discern and to understand and apply it to everyday life isn't literature dependent. So if Michigan is moving to 50-50 on that in the high school standards, it would be an improvement, because while we raised the level of informational text as a percentage of the overall curriculum in 2006, we didn't lower videography. So teachers still are trying to figure out which is the right thing to teach. While I was on the board as a Bush appointee, I was told repeatedly that Congress, which authorizes NAEP through legislation, well understands the political disaster a mandatory federal curriculum would be for both sides of the political spectrum, and that no effort had ever been made to convert NAEP to a national curriculum. Again, that's not to say it couldn't happen, but Washington politicians have always recognized and continue to understand the anger and tension this would cause, which is certainly visible with today's debate on these voluntary non-federal standards. I appreciate the frustration and passion reflected in today's hearing. I don't believe that withdrawing would be in the best educational interests of Michigan's children. I believe it's imperative that we adopt and keep standards that reflect best practices among the states and other countries with which Michigan and the U.S. have to compete on a day-to-day basis economically. The Common Core state standards bring needed change to K-12 education. They will help Michigan students be better educated so they can be engaged citizens with the skills and knowledge they need for employment and lifelong learning. Thank you for your patience and the opportunity to testify.
At this point, we'd like to ask Dr. Bill Schmidt to provide some information looking across the international spectrum.
First of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to this really important issue that confronts us in education policy. I have been studying mathematics standards and mathematics instruction for years, both here and around the world. I was the U.S. director and part of the international leadership of the TIMSS study, a major international study, where we examined in detail mathematics education in more than 40 countries. In that work, we analyzed standards, the standards of those countries, and the textbooks used to teach mathematics. And we studied that and determined what were the characteristics that distinguish the top performing countries from the rest of the countries. And I am convinced, based on that work, that the Common Core standards represent the best chance in at least several generations to ensure that all of the students in America, and here in Michigan in particular, get the mathematics education they need to flourish in today's world. The status quo, that is where we have been prior to the Common Core, is one of a patchwork of disparate and mismatched state standards, weakly enforced and poorly assessed, resulting in the kind of low achievement on international and our own national tests that was just spoken to. But even our best students do not do well in this international competition. Those students who are taking the most advanced courses we have in mathematics end up near the bottom when compared to their counterparts in the rest of the world. Why this is so important. The Common Core standards properly implemented, and that is an important if, because they are now being implemented, will dramatically improve the content of instruction. In a recent research study, we learned that the core is very consistent with the mathematics standards of the world's top leading and achieving countries. They are truly internationally benchmarked. We also have learned that those states with standards more like the Common Core, up to 2010, are the ones that did the best on the 2009 NAEP test. We also know that research mathematicians from across this country at some of the most prestigious universities support the Common Core. And the Fordham Institute, which was referred to as grading standards, also gives the Common Core standards a very high grade. Now, there's a lot of mistaken criticism of the core floating around. One is that the Common Core standards are something new and untested. But there is nothing mysterious about the Common Core. It's built on those principles which we learned from this international comparison. The most important one is coherence. That is, mathematics has a hierarchical structure to it. In this country, we often teach mathematics in an arbitrary fashion, without a particular order, in a hodgepodge fashion. But mathematics has that clear hierarchical structure. And we have learned that that needs to be reflected in the standards, and the Common Core does. But where we have been has not been there. And today, most of our schools have a scattershot approach, teaching the same material year after year, time after time, without any particular order. We've learned from the research I've just cited, as well as other research in other countries, that this approach doesn't work. The second principle is that other nations work very hard and to assure their democratic principles and make sure that all children have equal opportunities to learn. That's the part of the phrase common, that these standards are designed to eradicate the disparate sorts of opportunities different children have to learn mathematics. In fact, going to school in America right now, in counter to our best desires, it is like entering a game of chance, where the rules are not particularly made clear, but the consequences are serious. What children get to study depends on where their parents live, the community in which they live, the state in which they live. It depends on the school to which they are assigned, and even the teacher who happens to be their teacher in that given year. And those students who are placed in these weaker classes never really have a chance to catch up. And we find that some of the greatest disparate opportunities exist among the middle class students. The most serious charge that has been leveled against the Common Core is that it weakens the control of schools, or takes over the control of schooling. This characterization is quite misleading. The Common Core is not about the control of schools. All the Common Core does is to define the content that students are expected to learn at each grade level. That is all the Common Core by itself does. All the rest of the running of schools is left to the local school district, its administrators, its parents, and most importantly, its teachers, who can choose how to teach, those contents. And in fact, many teachers welcome this because they no longer have to struggle with their not so strong math backgrounds about what it is that should be taught. Related to this accusation is the one that the Common Core somehow represents a federal takeover of education. I would suggest this is just silly. The Common Core came out of an initiative by the Governors Association, work that began years ago. It's true that the federal government and others have spoken to this to try to encourage, and it's probably unfortunate that they did because this has muddied the waters. But the actual effort to try to establish internationally benchmarked standards with states working together began directly after the international study called TIMSS. I know this because I was there, because it was my responsibility to brief the governors of both parties, and this effort began then some 10 years ago. So unless we believe that there's a grand conspiracy that goes back 10 years and stretches across multiple administrations, that this is not a conspiracy for federal takeover. And I would actually say on a personal note that I had the opportunity, and one of the strongest proponents of this was our ex-governor, John Engler, with whom I had the opportunity and the privilege to work. The last thing I want to tell you is that there is overwhelming support for these common standards, both in Michigan and across the country. A survey conducted in a random sample of adults in the state of Michigan shows that 70% or more support the common standards and nearly universal backing for stronger math standards. National surveys also show that parents, some 80% or more, 90% of teachers and district administrators all back the Common Core, as do over 50 of the nation's leading corporations and companies. They are some of the strongest proponents of these Common Core standards. They tell us we need a workforce that is quite skilled in mathematics and that we need to have this in order to maintain our economic leadership. But we also need the opportunities that allow every student to succeed to the best of their ability. I ask you to seriously consider the negative consequences of withdrawing from the Common Core. I believe this legislation, if enacted into law, will harm our state's economy, and I believe, more importantly, it will hinder and hurt our children's futures. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative McMillan?
So if we don't like if we don't like a standard, how would we go about changing it if we're in the Common Core?
I'm smart. I'm deferring to Linda.
Okay.
The State Board of Education had the opportunity when they adopted the standards to, through recommendations from the field, to change up to 15% of those standards. So if there were a standard that was not found to be something that the state of Michigan wanted to engage in, that could be changed by the State Board of Education.
And if that standard happens to be taught in the Smarter Balance test, we'd just get it wrong?
Yep.
Really? And so, no, that's true. They would just get it wrong.
Let's have Eileen speak to this, and I'll give you a more specific answer.
I want to point out that in 2006, as part of the Achieve review of our state standards, we found that we were teaching that business practices drive markets in 8th grade economics, and had been for over 30 years. We were able to change that, but there still are some, and the review was very good, but as I said, there still are inconsistencies in our curriculum that as your child goes through high school, you would want to have changed. I don't believe, it's an interesting question, Tom, and I'd be happy to look into it further. When I asked our assessment people how they had dealt with business practices driving markets as opposed to the other way around for 8th grade economics, they said they just didn't assess it. So I think the seriousness of the question, though, is valid, and it's one we need to address.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. It's a basic question that we shouldn't get into something that we don't know how we would change a standard, and that if we don't like the standard and the kids actually are going to get penalized for the Michigan answer as opposed to the national answer. So I think that's very core. And also, Professor Schmidt, I believe you had said this in the MEA recent January-February magazine that while 95% of teachers support the Common Core, 75% don't know what they are.
No, I never
If you
said-
didn't, then it was the MEA. There was a researcher that they were referring to. I thought it was you.
Oh, it's over 70% actually know what the Common Core standards are for their particular grade level. It's the opposite, in fact.
Okay. Well, I remember reading it. I actually read it on the air as I was reading it in a debate, I believe it was. But anyway, it said 95% like it, 75% don't know, didn't realize that they're not teaching it and don't really know what's in it. So the idea that...
But that's not true. I again want to establish. The actual statistic is that 70% know the standards and have read the standards particular to their grade level.
Okay. Well, you disagree with the MEA. That's right.
And just to add to your question, or to add to the scope, and to give a great deal of depth to this, when a set of standards is put together and then assessment is put together after that, there's a large pool of questions that can be put forth in any one of the tests. And it's from that pool that we draw. There are times when standards may not be taught in a classroom, but one standard will not change the outcome of the assessment overall for a student. And so no matter what actually gets taught in the classroom and what gets assessed, there's a wide range of opportunity for a student to do well on that test.
I'm sorry, one last question, or one last response. Because Michigan is a governing state in the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, we are intricately involved in the production of the assessment. So I think that we have the ability, along with every other state in this consortium, to be able to provide feedback and make sure that change happens.
Yeah, but is that subject to FOIA? Are those Open Meetings Act meetings and decisions that are made?
They're non-profit. It's a non-profit.
Yeah, it's a non-profit. So somebody else, and we have no idea how these are going to be decided, what the debate is.
Well,
they're just going to be promulgated by somebody that's funded, by billions, by Gates Foundation and other outside interests. But we are not making the public won't know how these are being determined. There may be something put forward later, but there won't be Open Meetings Act, FOIA. There will be no ability to really understand what's behind the development.
Well, again, the states actually have the privilege and the right to be able to choose the particular items. As a psychometrician, these items are all scaled so that they can be used and still come up with the same estimates that are comparable across the states. That statistically is being handled. That then gives the privilege and the freedom to the individual states to choose those which would most closely align, perhaps with any deviations they have established with respect to their coverage of the Common Core.
Well, then what's the benefit of standards if you don't have to adhere to any of them, is what you're saying?
I don't believe that I said that.
Well, you said that they can decide how they're going to, they can decide any standard that they don't like, that they can choose a different standard.
Let me again speak to mathematics, which I know. That's just not going to happen, sir. In fact, mathematics is hierarchically structured. In order for students to learn mathematics, they must begin with number. They move to the algorithms of computation around number. They move to fractions. These things are clearly established and done in any decent mathematics program.
And my final question, I'll be done. Why is it that James Milgram of Stanford, the only mathematician on the validation committee for math, refused to sign it and said that this is actually dumbing down of our kids? Why?
Jim Milgram is a professor at Stanford. I know Jim Milgram quite well. We have frequent conversations. He's a friend. He has an opinion. He has a right to that opinion. He chose to do what he chose to for whatever reasons he did. He believed what he believes, and I'll respect that. But I again remind you, there are many other mathematicians that were involved in the development of these standards. There are numerous mathematicians across the country that very strongly support these standards. So, and even the Fordham Institute's mathematician who rated those gave it a high grade. So his opinion is one man's opinion. It's not the basis for making a decision as to the quality of those standards.
Representative Janetsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate everyone's testimony today, but I have, few concerns regarding the things that are going to be perceived as relatively standard. Someone in Michigan should use a comma after a dependent clause preceding an independent clause, whether in Michigan, Massachusetts, or California. But relative to being able to pick and choose standards and whether or not our students might get things wrong on a test, I'm a little more concerned that someone in California might decide that running a lawnmower is going to automatically ill affect climate change in a hurry versus someone someone in Massachusetts might agree that instantaneously all tax increases are beneficial to an economy, and I don't know that Michigan students should all be learning such stuff. With those things said, help ease my mind, because I thought when I heard that we could pick and choose the standards, and I know we're going with math and English first, which probably means there's going to be less subjectivity if we're talking about grammar and things of those nature. But when you talk about some of the more subjective things that could be taught, I've got some concerns, especially if the test questions will just get wrong. Help me.
I can't speak to English language arts.
You have to worry when they turn it over to the political person here. Because this is, again, going back to the National Governors Association, which publishes the state standards, okay? If you blur the line mentally as to whether this is a federal curriculum or a state-led curriculum, then it does get to be very dicey. But I found in my limited experience with governors that they tend to get reelected on the economy and education. So currently at the moment we have more Republican governors than Democrats. I guess you could say that maybe all the governors would eventually be Democrats and have espoused theories like business practices drive markets, but I don't see us going there. I see this as a professional. The professionals in each state are part of the leadership, or are the leadership. I see the National Governors Association putting their imprimatur on the standards. So I have trouble thinking that this could be so politicized that social studies would end up back where we had them in 2006. Again, it's the camel nose under the tent, but the facts don't match up with the very real fears and concerns about this curriculum, because people are confusing who wrote it and who leads it.
I think beyond that, the standards simply lay out a framework around which local school districts develop the actual curriculum and what's going to be taught in the classroom. And the teachers then are responsible for determining from within that curriculum what it is that they're going to teach and how it best needs to be taught to meet the needs of their students. So we have lots of stopgaps along the way. We also, anytime we have a standard that the lawnmower or the taxing, I can't believe that if that were to be introduced, that it would not come in under great discussion first at our state board level, certainly across the state with our educational organizations, such as the one that Wendy represents, and the teachers in this state would certainly provide input to us about what they thought about those kinds of standards being put in place. So there's a rich debate and dialogue that goes on around any of the standards, and I think that would happen around taxation or lawnmowers.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we have no further questions, but I see 4 people came up and only 3 took the mic.
Wendy, you want to talk a little bit?
Briefly, please. We're already 15 minutes over.
I appreciate the opportunity. I'm Wendy Zadeb-Roper, the Executive Director of the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals, representing about 1,800 principals in our state, assistant principals, career and tech directors. And essentially, there's 3 main points that I'd just like to make to you. That over the last 2 years, our members primarily have been really engaged in the work of implementing the Common Core state standards in preparation for the Smarter Balanced Assessments in 14-15. So it's been a great deal of time and effort in working on these standards, and people are really excited about the rigor that they bring. So we're very supportive of moving forward with this. Due to the consistency that the Common Core state standards bring, not only are teachers and administrators around the state able to collaborate and work together, but they also benefit from the resources that are available from the 47 other states that are going through the same process and doing this work. So it's really been a really great opportunity to collaborate, not only within our state, but within our nation. I also wanted to just stress the fact that that local control aspect is still there. Classroom instruction and instructional creativity are certainly not going to be eliminated by the adoption of these standards. And finally, I do want to basically support some of the points that have already been made about the cross-curricular aspect of these standards, and that it allows all of the different content areas to be engaged in the Common Core standards in increasing literacy and numeracy skills for all students. So we very much support moving to the Common Core state standards, and we hope that you'll maintain the direction that's already been set.
Does anybody have any questions? All right, thank you. We are past our allotted time, but I do want to read in the cards of folks who came and could not, due to time limits, speak. Tina DuPont from Rockford supports the bill. Chris Jurians from Grand Rapids supports the bill. Susan Burstein-Kahn